The Galactic Combat Academy's testing facility hummed with nervous energy as 12 species gathered for the most anticipated event of the semester. The Predator Assessment Trial. A test so brutal that 3 civilizations had officially banned their youth from participating after the infamous Claw Massacre of Sector 9 incident. Commander Vex-Prime, a towering Corellian with 4 eyes that could track 17 different movement patterns simultaneously, stood before the assembled candidates. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lighting as he surveyed the group with the kind of professional disdain that only comes from watching too many overconfident youngsters meet unfortunate ends. Welcome to what 73% of you will later describe as the worst mistake of your academic careers, Vex-Prime announced, his translator giving his words a cheerfully mechanical tone that somehow made them more ominous. Today, we separate the apex predators from the, well, let's call them nutritious prey items to spare feelings. The assembled beings shifted uncomfortably. There was Krex, a Draconian whose species had conquered 47 star systems through pure aggression. His scales rippled with contained violence as he flexed claws that could slice through titanium. Next to him stood Yara, a Nexian assassin whose people were literally born with retractable poison spikes and an instinctive knowledge of 17 different ways to kill with household objects. The Void Hunters were represented by twins, Zix and Zox, whose species had evolved in the frozen darkness between stars, developing the charming ability to see heat signatures from 3 miles away and move in absolute silence. Their pale, elongated forms practically screamed nightmare fuel to most civilized species. Then there was the Hive Mind Collective Unit, designated as BRICS. Technically, it was just one being, but that being had direct neural access to the combat experience of roughly 14 million warriors. Not exactly what you'd call a fair advantage, but the Academy had learned not to question hive mind mathematics after the arithmetic incident that had resulted in the destruction of an entire moon. At the far end stood Marcus Cole, the human representative. He looked disappointingly normal. Average height, brown hair that seemed to have given up on any particular style, and the kind of relaxed posture that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of the situation he'd wandered into. He was casually munching on something from a small bag, making tiny crunching sounds that somehow managed to be audible over the facility's background hum. Each species will face 3 trials, Vex-Prime continued, his primary eyes focusing on the group, while his secondary eyes monitored the safety systems. Because even the Academy's insurance company had limits. Tactical elimination, environmental adaptation, and psychological endurance. The Predator rating will determine your placement in advanced combat courses, access to restricted weapons training, and whether other species will cross to the opposite side of corridors when they see you coming. A ripple of excitement went through the group. Well, except for Marcus, who was now examining his bag of snacks with the intense concentration usually reserved for complex mathematical equations. Questions? Vex-Prime asked, already knowing this was a mistake. Krex's hand shot up, his voice a low growl that made several nearby instruments recalibrate themselves. Are there restrictions on collateral damage? Extensive ones. Please try not to reduce the facility to rubble. Again. Yara raised a slender appendage. Poison usage guidelines? Non-lethal only. We're testing predatory instincts, not planning actual funerals. The twins spoke in unison, their voices creating an unsettling harmony. Are psychological warfare tactics permitted? Within reason. No driving anyone permanently insane. The paperwork is exhausting. Marcus raised his hand, still holding his snack bag. Are we allowed to share food during the test? The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when physics itself seems to pause in confusion. Every eye, sensor, and heat-detecting organ in the room focused on the human, with the sort of attention typically given to unexploded ordnance. I'm sorry, what? Vex-Prime's translator actually seemed to stutter. Food sharing, offering snacks. It's considered polite where I'm from. Marcus held up the bag helpfully. These are called trail mix, mostly nuts and dried fruit. Very nutritious. Krex snorted, a sound like a steam engine having an asthma attack. The human wants to feed the competition. How charmingly naive. Oh, I'm not competing, Marcus said cheerfully. I'm just here for the educational experience. My advisor thought it would be character building, to see how other species approach conflict resolution. The silence deepened. Somewhere in the facility, a cooling system made a small whirring noise that sounded unnaturally loud. You're not competing? Vex-Prime's confusion was evident even through the mechanical translation. Then why are you in the testing chamber? Administrative error, probably. These things happen. But since I'm here, I figured I'd observe, maybe take notes. I'm working on my thesis about interspecies behavioral patterns under stress. Yara's poison spikes extended slightly, an involuntary response to what her species classified as predatory deception. Humans don't have a reputation for observation. Your species is known for aggressive expansion. Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. Aggressive? We're actually pretty peaceful now. Haven't had a major war in almost 6 months. That's practically a record for us. 6 months? Zix hissed, his thermal vision automatically scanning Marcus for signs of elevated body temperature. Your species considers 6 months a long peace. Well, to be fair, that one was mostly about trade routes, and it only lasted 3 days. Barely counts as a proper conflict. The assembled predators exchanged glances. Even the hive mind seemed to be having some kind of internal discussion, as evidenced by Brix's occasional twitching. Vex-Prime decided to move forward before his carefully planned schedule completely derailed. Regardless of your intentions, Mr. Cole, Academy regulations require all beings in the testing chamber during an active trial to participate. No exceptions. Insurance liability issues. Oh, well, that's unfortunate for everyone else, Marcus said, finishing the last of his trail mix and carefully folding the empty bag. I guess I should mention that I'm probably not going to be very good at this. Humans aren't really natural predators. The sound Krex made could best be described as skeptical laughter, if laughter typically involved grinding metal and barely contained violence. Not natural predators? Your species conquered half the known galaxy before we'd even figured out interstellar travel. That was mostly accidents and misunderstandings, Marcus explained helpfully. Plus, we're very persistent. Some people find that annoying. Accidents? Yara's voice had risen to a pitch that made several species instinctively check their hearing protection. You accidentally conquered the Terran Dominion? Oh, that. Well, we kept asking them to stop raiding our supply ships, and they kept not stopping, so eventually we had to do something about it. We tried diplomacy first, for almost a week. A week of diplomacy? Brix spoke for the first time, its collective voice sounding like a very polite army. Our records indicate the Terran Dominion was a militaristic empire spanning 43 star systems. Exactly. Very unreasonable people. Who needs 43 star systems anyway? We gave most of them back once they agreed to stop being pirates. The twins were now visibly disturbed, their heat-sensing organs working overtime as they tried to understand what they were dealing with. You gave back conquered territory? We kept the nice ones, the ones with good beaches and reasonable climates, and the ones with interesting food. Oh, and anywhere that had developed really good music. You can't just leave good music behind. Vex-Prime felt a headache building, which was impressive, considering his species didn't actually have heads in the traditional sense. Mr. Cole, are you trying to suggest that human expansion was based on recreational preferences? And strategic resource acquisition, Marcus added seriously. Can't forget strategic resource acquisition, though mostly it was the beaches. This is ridiculous, Krex growled, his patience wearing thin. Commander, let's begin the trials. I'm eager to show this human what real predatory behavior looks like. Excellent idea, Vex-Prime agreed, desperate to regain control of the situation. Trial 1. Tactical elimination. Each candidate will be placed in a simulated environment with multiple hostile targets. Success is measured by elimination speed, efficiency, and style points. Style points? Marcus asked. Aesthetic considerations, flair. Some species appreciate artistic expression in their violence. Oh, like performance art. That's nice. The testing chamber transformed itself into a urban warfare scenario, complete with multi-level buildings, debris fields, and what the Academy optimistically called expendable target drones, but which looked suspiciously like they'd once been sentient beings. The fact that they occasionally made small whimpering sounds didn't help the illusion. Krex went first, naturally. His approach could be generously described as comprehensive destruction. He burst through the nearest wall like an organic wrecking ball, his claws extending as he launched himself at the first target drone. The resulting carnage was efficient, brutal, and surprisingly artistic. Within 90 seconds, the urban landscape looked like it had been hit by a very angry hurricane with personal issues. Excellent form, Vex-Prime noted, making marks on his evaluation pad. Classic apex predator methodology. Strong finish. Impressive roar work. Yara took a more subtle approach, disappearing into the shadows and systematically eliminating targets with poison darts while remaining completely invisible. The drones never knew what hit them, which was probably a mercy. Her time was even better than Krex's, though she lost points for lack of dramatic flair. The twins worked together with the kind of synchronized precision that made watching them feel like observing a very deadly ballet. They moved through the environment like shadows made solid, their heat vision allowing them to track targets through walls, while their natural stealth kept them invisible until the moment they struck. Beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely lethal. Brix's approach was mathematically perfect. The collective consciousness allowed for predictive modeling that bordered on precognition, eliminating targets in an optimal sequence that minimized movement and maximized efficiency. It was like watching a computer program with teeth solve a very violent puzzle. Then it was Marcus's turn. He walked into the chamber, looked around thoughtfully, and then did something that made every monitoring system in the facility briefly question its own sanity. He started talking to the target drones. "Hello there," he said to the nearest one, which was making threatening gestures with what appeared to be a very large gun. "That's quite an impressive weapon you have there. Is it heavy?" "It looks heavy." The drone, programmed to respond to typical predatory behavior, seemed confused by this approach. Its threat assessment protocols had never encountered a target that opened with casual conversation. "I bet it's difficult to aim something that large," Marcus continued, walking closer with his hands visible and relaxed. "Must be exhausting to carry around all day." Have you considered switching to something more ergonomic? The drone's AI struggled with this input. It had been designed to respond to charging, stalking, ambushing, or various forms of tactical assault. Friendly conversation hadn't made it into the programming parameters. "Listen," Marcus said, now close enough to touch the confused machine. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to put that down and talk about this? I mean, we're both reasonable beings. Well, you're a drone, but you seem reasonable for a drone. I'm sure we can work something out." What happened next would later be debated in Academy tactical journals for decades. The drone, apparently overcome by what could only be described as existential confusion, lowered its weapon. "Thank you," Marcus said politely, taking the gun from the drone's unresisting grip. "That's very civilized of you. Now, I don't suppose you could help me convince your friends to do the same? I'd really prefer not to make this unpleasant for anyone." The watching predators stared in disbelief as Marcus proceeded to talk each target drone into surrender, occasionally complimenting them on their equipment or asking about their operational parameters. Within 10 minutes, he had collected a small arsenal of voluntarily surrendered weapons and was leading a group of docile drones toward the exit, like some kind of mechanical shepherd. "That's everyone, I think," he called to the observation deck. "Oh, except for that one hiding behind the water tank. Sir? Ma'am? I can see you back there. Would you mind joining us? We're having a nice discussion about conflict resolution." The final drone, apparently infected by whatever psychological phenomenon had affected its companions, shuffled out from behind cover and added its weapon to Marcus's growing collection. Wonderful. Now, is there somewhere these folks need to be? I'd hate to keep them from important duties. The silence in the observation deck was so complete that individual heartbeats were audible. Vex-Prime stared at his evaluation pad, then at the chamber, then back at his pad. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which was his species' equivalent of a complete mental reset. "What?" he finally managed. "Just happened?" Marcus appeared at the chamber exit, still followed by his parade of surrendered drones. "Oh, the trial's over. That was quick. I hope I didn't break anything. The drones seem nice. A little confused, maybe, but nice." "You talked to them," Krex said slowly, as if testing each word for hidden meanings. "Yes. Communication is typically the first step in conflict resolution. Seems obvious, really." "They're not programmed for conversation," Yara pointed out, her poison spikes still extended in involuntary confusion. "They're tactical training units designed to simulate hostile encounters." "Well, they're not hostile now," Marcus replied reasonably. "Seems like the simulation was a complete success." The twins spoke in their unsettling unison. "But you didn't eliminate them." "Why would I eliminate them? They surrendered. That's victory without casualties. Best possible outcome." Brix's collective consciousness seemed to be having some kind of internal argument, resulting in random twitching and what sounded like very quiet arguing in multiple languages. Vex-Prime looked at his evaluation criteria, then at Marcus, then at the peacefully gathered drones who were now apparently having their own quiet conversation among themselves. "Mr. Cole," he said carefully, "the objective was tactical elimination." "Right. I eliminated the tactical situation. No more conflict. Mission accomplished." "By talking." "Mostly talking, yes. Very effective technique. Highly underrated in military circles. You've convinced a group of programmed training drones to surrender through casual conversation. They seemed reasonable. I just treated them like reasonable beings, and they responded reasonably. Amazing how well that works." Krex made a sound like a landslide having trust issues. "This is impossible. "It's really not," Marcus said cheerfully. "Humans do this sort of thing all the time. We're quite good at convincing other beings to see things our way. It's one of our more useful skills." "Other beings, yes," Yara hissed. "But those are machines?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Are they? Well, that explains why they seemed a bit stiff in conversation. Still, artificial intelligence is intelligence. Just because it's artificial doesn't mean it's not worth talking to." The implications of this statement hung in the air like a philosophical bomb with a very short fuse. Vex-Prime realized that his carefully planned testing schedule had just encountered something unprecedented in Academy history. A candidate who had succeeded at the trial through methods so far outside the expected parameters that his evaluation systems literally didn't have categories for what had just happened. "Trial 2, he announced weakly, hoping desperately that things would return to some semblance of normal. "Environmental adaptation. Candidates will be placed in a hostile environment and must survive while achieving specific objectives." The chamber reconfigured itself into what could generously be described as aggressively inhospitable. Extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, unstable terrain, and periodic bursts of radiation that would make most life forms reconsider their career choices. Krex attacked the environment like it had personally offended his ancestors, using brute force to smash through obstacles and his natural resilience to power through conditions that would kill most beings in seconds. He completed his objectives through sheer determination and what appeared to be spite-driven invulnerability. Yara used her species' natural adaptation, abilities to become temporarily immune to the hostile conditions, moving through the environment like it was her natural habitat. Her poison resistance helped with the toxic atmosphere, while her natural agility allowed her to navigate the unstable terrain with ease. The twins treated the hostile environment as their natural element, their evolution in the void between stars having prepared them for conditions that most species couldn't even conceptualize. They moved through the chamber like they were coming home. Bricks calculated optimal paths through the hazards with mathematical precision, using its collective knowledge to predict environmental changes and adapt accordingly. Its approach was flawlessly logical and perfectly executed. Then Marcus entered the chamber. He looked around, pulled out a small device, and began making notes. "Fascinating," he murmured, apparently oblivious to the radiation that should have been cooking him from the inside. "These temperature fluctuations follow an interesting pattern." He walked to the nearest objective marker, completely ignoring the toxic gas vents that were spewing death in colorful clouds, and examined the required task with academic interest. "Oh, I see. We're supposed to collect samples from these mineral formations. Interesting crystal structure." He reached out and casually broke off a piece of what the Academy's safety protocols classified as extremely hazardous xenominerals that should only be handled with full protective equipment and several insurance waivers. He held it up to the light, turning it to examine it from different angles. "Pretty. I bet this would make nice jewelry." Meanwhile, the environmental hazards that should have been making his life miserable seemed to be malfunctioning. The radiation bursts kept missing him by inches, as if the timing was slightly off. The toxic gas vents activated just before or after he passed by them. The unstable terrain seemed to solidify under his feet while crumbling everywhere else. "Unusual seismic activity," he noted, making more marks in his notebook while standing in the exact spot where the ground should have collapsed. Almost like the geological stress patterns are responding to localized pressure differentials. He moved through the environment with the casual confidence of someone taking a pleasant walk through a park, collecting samples and making observations while environmental hazards tried and failed to create hazardous situations around him. "Temperature regulation is quite sophisticated," he commented, as a blast of superheated air shot past him, missing by millimeters. "Whoever designed this system has a real understanding of thermodynamics." By the time he reached the final objective point, the environmental systems had given up trying to kill him and seemed to be actively avoiding him instead. He completed his tasks with the relaxed efficiency of someone who had never once considered that he might be in danger. "All done," he announced, returning to the exit with his samples. "Lovely environment. Reminds me of home, actually. Earth's got some pretty hostile places, too. Australia, for instance, or New Jersey." The observation deck had fallen into what could only be described as stunned silence. Even the monitoring equipment seemed confused, several displays flickering between normal readings and what appeared to be error messages. "How?" Brix asked, its collective voice smaller than usual. "Are you still alive?" "Good reflexes, I suppose. And humans are pretty adaptable. We evolved on a death world after all. Everything on Earth is either trying to kill you, eat you, or make you pay taxes. You develop instincts." "Death world?" Vex-Prime's translator seemed to hiccup on the phrase. "Oh, yes, Earth's quite dangerous. Aggressive weather, natural disasters, predatory wildlife, poisonous plants, deadly bacteria. And that's just the natural hazards. Then you've got humans, who are arguably more dangerous than everything else combined. Makes you pretty hard to kill, growing up in an environment like that." The assembled predators looked at each other with growing unease. Several of them were beginning to suspect that they might have misunderstood something fundamental about humans. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime said carefully, "when you say death world, you mean this figuratively, correct?" "Oh no, it's quite literal. Earth has a 97% hostile biosphere rating. Almost everything on the planet is actively trying to end your existence in creative ways. Makes for an interesting childhood. And humans evolved there? For several million years. Really toughens you up. Plus, it teaches you to get along with dangerous things. When everything around you can kill you, you learn to be polite." The implications of this revelation settled over the group like a blanket made of pure existential dread. "Trial 3, Vex-Prime announced with the tone of someone who had already given up on understanding the universe. "Psychological endurance. Each candidate will face their deepest fears in a controlled mental simulation. The test measures your ability to maintain rational thought under extreme psychological pressure." The chamber shifted into something that looked suspiciously like a therapist's office designed by someone who had only heard therapy described by a particularly vindictive artificial intelligence. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and an atmosphere that somehow managed to be more threatening than the previous trials combined. "This test accesses your subconscious terror responses," Vex-Prime explained, his four eyes darting nervously between his evaluation pad and Marcus, who was examining the furniture with professional interest. "The simulation will present scenarios specifically designed to break your mental defenses. Previous candidates have experienced anything from facing their natural predators to reliving traumatic childhood memories to confronting their own mortality in graphic detail." "Sounds comprehensive," Marcus nodded approvingly. "Very thorough psychological assessment methodology. I'm impressed." Krex stepped forward first, his scales already shifting to combat readiness. "Let's finish this. I'm eager to show these weaklings what true mental fortitude looks like." The chamber darkened around him, and suddenly he was facing something that made his entire species' evolutionary nightmare fuel look like a pleasant bedtime story. The simulation had reached into his genetic memory and pulled out the bone weavers, an extinct species that had once hunted Draconians for sport across 17 star systems. They moved like liquid death, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure malevolence. Krex lasted exactly 47 seconds before the simulation had to be terminated for his own psychological safety. He emerged from the chamber making small whimpering sounds and occasionally checking over his shoulder for threats that weren't there. Acceptable performance, Vex-Prime lied kindly. Bone weavers are particularly challenging opponents. Nothing to be ashamed of. Yara entered next, her natural confidence radiating like a personal force field. The simulation presented her with her species' ultimate fear, complete sensory deprivation combined with the sound of approaching footsteps. For an assassin species that relied on stealth and awareness, it was the equivalent of being buried alive while simultaneously being hunted. She managed 2 minutes and 14 seconds before her survival instincts overrode her rational mind, and she began attacking the walls of the simulation chamber. Her extraction was accompanied by creative profanity in 4 different languages. The twins faced the simulation together, their shared consciousness allowing them to support each other against psychological assault. The simulation responded by creating a scenario where they were separated and forced to watch each other die repeatedly in increasingly creative ways. Their synchronized screaming lasted almost 3 minutes before the safety protocols engaged. Brix's experience was unique, as the simulation had to account for a collective consciousness. The result was a feedback loop that created infinite recursive terror, with each individual mind in the collective experiencing the fears of every other mind simultaneously. The resulting mental cascade required emergency intervention after 98 seconds to prevent permanent psychological damage to roughly 14 million beings. Then it was Marcus's turn. He walked into the simulation chamber with the same casual confidence he'd shown throughout the previous trials. The psychological scanning systems activated, probing his subconscious for suitable terror triggers. For several long moments, nothing happened. The monitoring systems hummed with increasing intensity as they scanned deeper, searching for something, anything, that would provoke a fear response. The advanced artificial intelligence running the simulation began cycling through increasingly exotic psychological pressure techniques. Still, nothing. "Is there a malfunction?" Yara asked, her voice still slightly shaky from her own experience. "The systems are operating normally," Vex-Prime replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Sometimes candidates require more extensive psychological mapping to identify appropriate triggers. In the chamber, Marcus had found a comfortable chair and was sitting patiently, occasionally checking what appeared to be a small timepiece. He seemed completely relaxed, as if he were waiting for a bus that was running slightly late. The simulation systems, growing increasingly desperate, began throwing everything they had at him. Childhood fears, species-wide terrors, existential dread, cosmic horror, mathematical anxiety, the works. They even tried showing him administrative paperwork that needed to be completed in triplicate. Marcus's stress indicators remained completely flat. "This is impossible," Brix whispered, its collective voice carrying undertones of genuine confusion. "Every sentient being has psychological vulnerabilities. It's a fundamental requirement of consciousness." "Maybe the simulation isn't working properly," Krex suggested, though his scales were still rippling with residual trauma from his own experience. Vex-Prime was now manually checking every system, his 4 eyes darting between displays with increasing panic. "All systems are functioning within normal parameters. Psychological pressure is at maximum safe levels." The artificial intelligence is utilizing every known fear trigger in the Academy database. In the chamber, Marcus raised his hand politely. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice clearly audible through the monitoring systems. "I don't mean to interrupt, but are we getting started soon? I have a lunch appointment in about an hour." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when the fundamental laws of physics decide to take an unscheduled coffee break. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime's voice cracked slightly as his translator tried to process his emotional state. "The test is currently running. You should be experiencing intense psychological pressure designed to access your deepest fears." "Oh," Marcus looked around the empty chamber with renewed interest. "That explains the flashing lights. I wondered what that was about. Very subtle. I barely noticed." "You barely noticed the psychological warfare simulation?" "Well, there was a bit of a weird humming sound and some lights flashing, but nothing too distracting. Is it supposed to be more obvious? Maybe the volume needs to be turned up." The artificial intelligence running the simulation was now frantically cycling through emergency protocols, apparently convinced that it was experiencing some kind of technical malfunction. Error messages began cascading across monitoring screens as the system struggled to understand how a subject could be completely immune to psychological manipulation. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime tried again, his voice taking on the careful tone of someone explaining something very important to someone very confused. "The simulation is specifically designed to trigger fear responses. It should be presenting you with scenarios calculated to cause maximum psychological distress." "Oh, it's doing that," Marcus nodded helpfully. "I can tell it's trying very hard. There was a moment where it showed me what I think was supposed to be a giant spider, and then something that might have been my worst childhood memory, though honestly I'm not sure which childhood memory it was trying to go for. I had quite a few that could qualify." "And this doesn't frighten you?" Marcus considered this seriously. "Well, no. Should it? I mean, it's obviously a simulation. Very well done, mind you, but clearly artificial. The rendering is quite impressive, though the behavioral algorithms could use some work. The spider moved wrong." "Moved wrong?" Yara asked, her professional curiosity overriding her lingering trauma. "Yes, real giant spiders move differently. More deliberate, less theatrical. This one was clearly designed by someone who'd never actually seen a giant spider in action." The assembled predators exchanged glances that carried several layers of concern. "Mr. Cole," Krex said slowly, "when you say real giant spiders, you mean this hypothetically, correct?" "Oh no, quite literally. Australia has some impressive arachnids. Not technically giant by galactic standards, I suppose, but large enough to be concerning. Plus, there's the Huntsman colony on Mars now. Those got genuinely giant after the terraforming accident. Size of dinner plates, some of them." "Terraforming accident?" The twins spoke in unison, though their voice carried a new note of horrified fascination. "Long story. Involved genetic modification, artificial gravity, and what our scientists later described as aggressive evolutionary adaptation. The spiders seem quite happy with their new size, though. Very social creatures once you get to know them." The simulation was now cycling through what appeared to be its entire database of cosmic horrors, presenting Marcus with a parade of eldritch abominations that would have driven most beings to immediate madness. Marcus watched them with the polite attention of someone viewing a mildly interesting documentary. "The tentacle creature is particularly well designed," he commented to the monitoring systems. "Though again, the movement patterns are a bit off. Real tentacle creatures are more fluid." This one moves, like it's operating under different gravitational constants. Real tentacle creatures? Vex-Prime's voice had risen to a pitch that suggested his sanity was hanging by increasingly thin threads. Deep sea exploration turned up some interesting species. Plus, there was that incident with the dimensional gateway that opened near Neptune. The research team established diplomatic relations eventually, but the first contact protocols were a bit tense. Dimensional gateway? Brix's collective voice had shrunk to barely above a whisper. Accident involving theoretical physics, and what our scientists diplomatically termed unforeseen consequences. The beings from the other dimension were actually quite reasonable once we figured out how to communicate. They've been very helpful with our research into alternative mathematics. The simulation, apparently reaching the limits of its programming, began presenting Marcus with increasingly abstract concepts of fear. Pure terror distilled into mathematical equations, existential dread presented as geometric shapes, and something that could only be described as weaponized anxiety in the form of interpretive dance. Marcus watched it all with the detached interest of an academic observer. Fascinating approach to psychological manipulation, he noted. Very creative use of abstract representation. Though I'm not sure the interpretive dance is having the intended effect. It's actually quite soothing. Soothing? Vex-Prime had given up on understanding anything and was now just documenting the impossible for posterity. Yes, reminds me of a performance art piece I saw on Kepler Station. Very relaxing. The artist was exploring themes of cosmic insignificance through contemporary movement. Won several awards. The artificial intelligence running the simulation was now displaying what could only be described as the psychological equivalent of a complete nervous breakdown. Error messages were spawning error messages, creating cascading failures that threatened to crash the entire testing facility's computer network. "Emergency shutdown," Vex-Prime ordered, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession. "Before the AI achieves sentience, just so it can experience an existential crisis." The chamber powered down, leaving Marcus sitting peacefully in his chair, looking mildly disappointed. Already finished? That was refreshing. Very meditative. You should consider offering this as a stress relief program for students. The assembled predators stared at him with the kind of expression usually reserved for natural phenomena that defy classification. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime began carefully, "the simulation you just experienced is designed to break the psychological defenses of apex predators. It utilizes techniques developed from studying the most terrifying experiences of thousands of species across the galaxy." Right. Very comprehensive. I could tell a lot of work went into it. And it had no effect on you whatsoever. Well, I wouldn't say no effect. It was quite entertaining. Educational, even. I learned several new concepts about fear response that I'll definitely include in my thesis. "Your thesis on what, exactly?" Yara asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Interspecies behavioral patterns under stress. Like I mentioned, this has been incredibly valuable data. I had no idea other species experienced fear so intensely." The silence that followed was pregnant with implications that nobody wanted to deliver. "Mr. Cole," Brix said carefully, its collective voice carrying the weight of 14 million minds trying to process the same impossible information. "Are you suggesting that humans don't experience fear the way other species do?" "Oh, we experience fear," Marcus replied cheerfully. "We just have a very high threshold for what qualifies as genuinely frightening. Growing up on Earth tends to calibrate your threat assessment systems quite aggressively." "How aggressively?" Krex asked, though he seemed to already regret the question. Well, let's see. Humans consider bungee jumping a recreational activity. We intentionally seek out dangerous animals for entertainment purposes. We invented extreme sports specifically to manufacture artificial danger for fun. Our children play games that simulate warfare, and we consider all of this completely normal behavior. The predators processed this information with varying degrees of horror. But surely you have limits, Yara pressed. Something that would trigger genuine fear responses. Marcus thought about this seriously. Paperwork is pretty terrifying, especially tax forms, and public speaking makes a lot of people nervous. Oh, and spiders, though that's more of a learned response than genuine terror. You mentioned spiders earlier, Vex-Prime noted, as something you've actually encountered? Right. Australian huntsmen, Martian colonies, the usual. But those are actually quite friendly once you get to know them. It's the small ones you have to worry about, the ones with the really interesting venom. Interesting venom? The twins were now visibly disturbed, their heat-sensing organs working overtime. Australia's got some remarkable biodiversity when it comes to things that can kill you. Very creative evolutionary approaches to lethality. Makes for fascinating study subjects. And this doesn't frighten you? Why would it? It's just biology. Very aggressive biology, granted, but that's what makes it interesting. Vex-Prime looked at his evaluation forms, then at Marcus, then at the smoking remains of the psychological simulation system, then back at his evaluation forms. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he tried to process what he was supposed to do with test results that literally broke the testing methodology. Mr. Cole, he finally managed, I need to ask you a direct question. Are humans actually apex predators? Marcus looked genuinely surprised by the question. Oh, absolutely. We're probably the most successful predator species in galactic history. We've colonized more planets than any other single species. We've established dominance over multiple star systems, and we've successfully integrated dozens of other species into our society through a combination of diplomacy, economic pressure, and strategic application of overwhelming force. But you said you were peaceful. We are peaceful, now mostly. We learned that cooperation is more efficient than conquest for achieving long-term goals. Plus, conquest generates a lot of paperwork, and nobody likes paperwork. So humans chose to become peaceful? It was more practical? Wars are expensive, and they interfere with trade. Much easier to convince other species to do business with you than to fight them. Though we keep the military around just in case. Old habits. How large is the human military? Brix asked, its collective voice carrying undertones of professional curiosity. Oh, not that large by our standards. Maybe a few billion active personnel across all branches, plus reserves, and the civilian militia programs, and the various colonial defense forces. The number hung in the air like a mathematical proof of humanity's complete insanity. A few billion. Krex's voice had climbed several octaves. Well, Earth's population is approaching 12 billion, and we maintain military presence across 47 star systems, plus the deep space exploration fleets, orbital defense platforms, and various special operations divisions. It adds up. 12 billion humans? Yara's poison spikes had fully extended in an involuntary threat response. Just on Earth, the colonies add another 8 billion or so. Growing population is a sign of successful expansion. 20 billion humans, Vex-Prime repeated slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meanings. Give or take. The census data is always a few years behind actual numbers. Humans reproduce quite efficiently when resources are abundant. The assembled predators sat in stunned silence as the implications of this information settled over them like a mathematical avalanche. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime said finally, "I think there may have been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's status in galactic civilization." "How so?" "The Academy's files list humans as a recently contacted species, with limited expansion and moderate technological development." Marcus looked puzzled. "That seems inaccurate. We've had interstellar travel for almost 2 centuries. Though I suppose recent is relative when you're dealing with galactic timescales. 2 centuries? Give or take a few decades. Time flies when you're busy colonizing star systems. But the first official contact between humans and the Galactic Federation was only 37 years ago." "Oh, that. Yes, we waited quite a while before making formal contact. We wanted to observe Federation protocols and make sure we understood galactic politics before introducing ourselves officially. Seemed more polite than just showing up unannounced." "You've been watching us for over a century?" "Well, yes. It's only reasonable to do proper research before beginning diplomatic relations. We learned a lot about galactic civilization during that time. Very educational." "And during this research period, what were you doing?" "The usual. Exploring, expanding, establishing colonies, developing technology, the occasional minor conflict with hostile species, standard civilization building activities." Vex-Prime felt something that his species' evolution had never prepared him for, a sensation that could only be described as the psychological equivalent of looking down and realizing you've been standing on the edge of a cliff for the past several hours. "Mr. Cole," he said very carefully, "exactly how many star systems does humanity currently control?" "Control is such a strong word. We prefer maintain a presence in. Much more diplomatic. Though I suppose it's around 400 systems, depending on how you define control." The silence that followed was so complete that several monitoring devices began running self-diagnostics, convinced they had suffered complete sensor failure. 400 systems, Krex whispered. "Roughly. Some are just research outposts or mining operations. Others are full colonies with billions of residents. It varies." "The entire Galactic Federation encompasses less than 300 systems," Yara said faintly. "Yes, we noticed that. Very impressive organization, though. Excellent administrative structure. We've been quite impressed with Federation efficiency." "You've been studying our administrative structure?" "Among other things. Humans are naturally curious about different approaches to government and social organization. Very educational to observe different species working together. Brix's collective consciousness seemed to be having some kind of internal emergency conference, judging by the rapid twitching and occasional sparks coming from its neural interfaces. "Mr. Cole," it finally managed, "are you saying that humanity has been observing the Galactic Federation while simultaneously expanding across a territory larger than the Federation itself?" "In very simplified terms, yes. Though we've been careful not to interfere with Federation space or operations. We're very respectful of established territorial boundaries." "Respectful?" Vex-Prime repeated. "Oh, yes. We've gone to great lengths to avoid any conflicts with Federation species. There have been a few incidents with unaffiliated hostile civilizations, but nothing that would impact Federation interests." "What kind of incidents?" Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "The usual. Pirates, aggressive expansion attempts by militant species, a few cases of attempted genocide that required intervention. Standard peacekeeping operations." Attempted genocide? The hegemony war was unfortunate. Very unpleasant species, the hegemony. They had some disturbing ideas about species purity and territorial expansion. We tried diplomacy first, of course. For how long? Almost a full day. But they seemed quite committed to their genocidal agenda, so we had to take more direct action. Direct action? Complete military intervention. The war lasted about 6 hours. 6 hours? They surrendered fairly quickly once they realized the scope of human military capability. We were very generous in the peace terms. Let them keep 3 systems and established monitoring protocols to prevent future genocidal activities. The assembled predators looked at each other with the dawning realization that they might have seriously misjudged humanity's position in the galactic hierarchy. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime said slowly, "I'm beginning to suspect that humans might not be the peaceful, recently contacted species we believed you to be." "Oh, we're definitely peaceful," Marcus assured him. "We just have very effective methods for maintaining that peace. Turns out, most species are quite reasonable once they understand the alternatives." The alternatives being? Comprehensive military defeat, followed by integration into human-supervised, peaceful coexistence programs. Very effective deterrent against aggressive behavior. How many species have you integrated? Into full alliance partnerships? Maybe 30 or so. Another 50 have signed non-aggression treaties. The rest have been remarkably peaceful since the hegemony demonstration. Demonstration? The 6-hour war I mentioned. Word travels fast in interstellar politics. Most species prefer negotiation to the alternative. Vex-Prime looked at his evaluation forms, then at the wreckage of his testing systems, then at Marcus, who was sitting peacefully with his hands folded, looking like the most harmless being in the galaxy. "Mr. Cole," he said finally, "I don't think the Predator assessment trial is equipped to properly evaluate humans." "That's understandable," Marcus replied kindly. "Humans are a bit of an edge case when it comes to standard Predator classifications. We don't fit neatly into most behavioral categories." "What would you say is the appropriate classification for humans?" Marcus considered this thoughtfully. Peaceful apex predator with diplomatic preferences and overwhelming force projection capability. Also, we're very persistent. Persistent how? Well, we've been expanding across the galaxy for 2 centuries, we've never lost a war, we've successfully integrated dozens of species into cooperative relationships, and we did all of this while maintaining detailed observational records of every other civilization we encountered. That takes a certain amount of follow-through. The implications of humanity's true nature settled over the group, like a revelation wrapped in an existential crisis. "Mr. Cole," Vex-Prime said, with the tone of someone who had just discovered that gravity was optional, "I believe we may need to revise some of our assumptions about human society." "That seems reasonable," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "Though I should mention that my lunch appointment is in 15 minutes, so if there are any other tests, we might need to schedule them for later." "Lunch appointment with whom?" "Admiral Sarah Chen. She's the human liaison to the Academy's administrative board. We're discussing the possibility of establishing a joint training program between human military academies and the Galactic Combat Academy." "Joint training program?" "Educational exchange. Human students could learn about Federation tactical approaches, while Federation students could observe human conflict resolution methods. Very valuable cross-cultural experience. And Admiral Chen is senior military officer. She commands the 3rd Deep Space Fleet, about 40,000 ships, give or take. very experienced officer. Also, she makes excellent sandwiches. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of several careers in military assessment, having complete existential breakdowns. 40,000 ships? Krex managed. In just the Third Fleet, yes. Humans maintain several deep space fleets for exploration and peacekeeping operations. Admiral Chen's is one of the smaller ones. Vex-Prime stared at his evaluation pad, then very deliberately put it down and stepped away from it as if it might explode. "Mr. Cole," he said with the careful pronunciation of someone choosing their words very, very carefully, "I think this concludes your assessment." "Excellent. That was very educational. I learned quite a lot about Federation approaches to military evaluation. Admiral Chen will be very interested in my report." "Your report?" "For the Joint Training Program proposal. This was partly a reconnaissance mission to evaluate Academy training methods and assess compatibility with human educational approaches." The assembled predators looked at each other as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You've been evaluating us," Yara said faintly. "Among other things, yes. Very impressive facility. Excellent safety protocols. Though you might want to upgrade the psychological simulation systems, I think I may have broken your artificial intelligence. And your assessment of our predator evaluation methods." Marcus considered this seriously. "Very thorough, but perhaps calibrated for species with less aggressive environmental backgrounds. You might need different parameters for evaluating apex predators from death worlds." "Different how?" "Well, you could start by asking if candidates have ever negotiated with sentient natural disasters, or survived childhood on a planet where the wildlife considers you a light snack, or accidentally conquered civilizations while trying to establish trade routes. Those are actual evaluation criteria for humans? More like basic life skills, really. But they could translate into useful assessment parameters." Vex-Prime nodded slowly, his 4 eyes blinking in what his species used, for resigned acceptance of the impossible. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I believe you may have just revolutionized our understanding of apex predator assessment." "Happy to help," Marcus replied cheerfully, standing and brushing imaginary dust from his clothes. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I really do need to get to that lunch appointment. Admiral Chen gets cranky when people are late, and cranky admirals tend to solve problems by deploying overwhelming force." "How overwhelming?" Brix asked, though its collective voice suggested it didn't really want to know. "Well, she once ended a diplomatic crisis by parking a battle fleet in orbit around the problem planet until everyone agreed to behave reasonably. Very effective negotiation technique." "How large was the battle fleet?" "Only about 1,000 ships. Like I said, Admiral Chen prefers subtle approaches to problem solving." Marcus headed for the exit, pausing only to collect his notebook and the empty snack bag he'd carefully saved. "Thank you all for a delightful morning," he said politely. "This has been tremendously educational. I hope we can do this again sometime." He disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a group of supposedly apex predators who were beginning to suspect they might not be quite as apex as they'd previously believed. "Well," Vex-Prime said finally, setting down his evaluation pad with the finality of someone accepting that the universe had fundamentally changed when he wasn't looking. "I suppose we should probably update our assessment criteria." "To what?" Krex asked weakly. "I'm thinking we might need an entirely new classification system, something that accounts for species that consider galactic conquest a minor administrative inconvenience." "What do we call that?" Yara wondered. "Human," Brix replied, its collective voice carrying the weight of 14 million minds coming to the same impossible conclusion. And somewhere in the Academy's administrative offices, Admiral Sarah Chen was indeed making excellent sandwiches while casually planning the diplomatic integration of the Galactic Combat Academy into humanity's rapidly expanding network of peaceful, cooperative, and absolutely non-negotiable interstellar relationships. After all, humans were very persistent about making friends. Whether other species wanted to be friends or not was really just a matter of communication. And humans were exceptionally good at communication.